Today, we explain creatine, what it is, how it works, and who might be a good candidate for supplementation. Howdy friends, Tyler here at Healthway Nutrition Center, and we're excited to talk to you about creatine. In this video, we'll not only address how creatine works and who might want to take it, but we'll also include the right type of creatine to take and the right way to take it. We'll address who should not take creatine, and finally, we'll delve into creatine's role in brain health, which is perhaps the most exciting area of creatine research. We're going to quickly give you the most in-depth video on creatine you've seen yet, so join us for the ride, and we're so happy to have you along. Let's jump right into it with what is creatine? Creatine is a naturally occurring compound within the human body that supports our energy levels. We can manufacture creatine from our dietary protein with our liver and kidneys working in tandem with a little help from our pancreas. We can also get preformed creatine in our diet from animal-sourced foods, specifically with red meat and fish being the richest sources. Creatine's main method of action in our body is very straightforward. It works by regenerating our ATP or cellular energy. While a lot of us are familiar with some of the basics surrounding cellular energy in that we have our cells that have a mitochondria inside and they produce this ATP, which is how our body moves energy around and generally fueling every process in our body. What a lot of us are not aware of, though, is that we keep very little ATP on hand in any given moment, meaning to make it through the whole day, we're constantly having to produce more ATP. Hundreds of times we're producing ATP throughout the day and burning through what we had. This is where creatine comes in. While our body is using up the ATP we had on hand and is pivoting to make more, creatine fills that gap and regenerates the used ATP, allowing us to continue to put out energy and not feel this moment of fatigue, slower recovery, and reduced peak energy output that a lack of creatine would cause. When people hear about creatine and its relationship with energy, it often causes a bit of confusion as to whether we're adding energy to the system. Are we going to feel more energetic? Are we going to, feel like we just had some caffeine or something? To help get our head around this important detail, we've come up with an analogy that may be a little imperfect, but we think it really helps. Imagine that we have a field of our players on a team, and these individual players represent our ATP or cellular energy. And creatine is like this rule that allows us to substitute any player on the field who becomes tired with a fresh, well-rested player off the bench. This ensures that our whole team is constantly optimal and nobody is fatigued. When you supplement with creatine, you add to how many players are on your bench. You have a greater ability to substitute and support your team. So while the number of players on the field may never change, meaning we're not adding ATP, we're not going to have more ATP and cellular energy on hand, but we'll be that much better and have that much deeper resources to support those players who are on the field when they get tired. We really like this analogy for ATP and creatine because creatine is essentially a backup energy reserve that kicks in when we need it. So it won't have you bouncing off the walls, but it will stabilize your energy levels, allowing you to go further and produce greater peak energy output. So who might want to supplement with creatine? One of the beautiful things about creatine is that we've been researching it for nearly 100 years, and we have clear-cut answers as to who's most likely to benefit. Our first two groups include those looking to support athletic performance and those with lower protein diets, specifically low animal protein intake. We've perhaps explained enough, and we will talk a little bit more about athletic performance later, so let's focus on the lower protein diet. The answer here is quite simple. We make our body's endogenous creatine from our protein intake. If we're not getting enough of those raw materials to make creatine, we're inherently lowering our baseline levels of creatine. And if we're also not getting external creatine from animal food sources, we're now completely reliant on our body's production, which again typically results in low baseline levels of creatine. We have less players on our bench. We have less of this energy reserve to support our bodies dealing with stress and energy output. Two other groups that get a strong honorable mention here, because while the research is preliminary, it's also very promising and it's consistent with our current understanding of creatine. And that is those over the age of 50 and those who experience chronic stress and or sleep deprivation. These two groups have a common thread that ties them together, and that is impaired energy metabolism. Whether it's through the natural aging process or due to fatigue and a lack of sleep, this impairs our ability to regenerate our energy and recover, as well as that peak energy output. This is essentially a state where our energy metabolism is less than optimal, and this is where creatine shines. Having that reserve that can step in when that less than optimal energy isn't quite performing up to snuff can make a meaningful difference in how we feel throughout the day and our energy, both in a physical sense from using our skeletal muscles to our mental processes and dealing with stressful times and environments. So how do we go about supplementing with creatine if we want to? Well, first, let's address the type of creatine because it's a very quick comment, and that is creatine monohydrate. Creatine monohydrate is the single most researched form of creatine, so we know it's the most likely to work. It's the single most researched form for safety, so we know it's the safest choice. And finally, it's also inexpensive and readily available. So while there are other forms of creatine out there, nothing's going to beat creatine monohydrate that we've seen. And if we were going to be picky about fancier forms of creatine, we would point out that micronized creatine monohydrate is a finer powder that mixes easier and is just more pleasant to use. So get yourself a good quality creatine monohydrate from a good manufacturer and a trustworthy retailer in powder form, and you'll be set to go. So how do we go about taking creatine? Well, you'll notice we mentioned powder. The amount of creatine recommended to take is high enough that we usually have to take too many capsules for that to be an appealing option. So we really do recommend powder here. Additionally, while it's common for us to see products that are mixed in liquid form ahead of time or maybe in a gummy, creatine's not a good fit for that because in a base of water and some other substances, creatine can actually break down into an inactive form, meaning it won't benefit us. So we caution against mixing creatine overnight and taking it in the morning. And we also don't recommend creatine in gummy form, nor do we recommend it in hot or acidic beverages. So generally, you want to mix your creatine and consume it fairly quickly, within an hour or two being a reasonable time frame. The amount of creatine is a little controversial, but the research is quite clear here. Roughly 5 grams of creatine powder per day, every day. The time of day does not make a critical difference because our end goal is not a short-term one. We're slowly raising our body's base levels of creatine over time by supplementing, and then we're maintaining those levels once they've reached their peak. So it's not really about the exact amount you take. It's about being consistent. Roughly 5 grams. We've heard some people argue that past research showed 3 grams was adequate. Yeah, it did, and that's close enough to roughly 5 grams. We've also heard some argue that, well, for a larger individual who specifically has greater skeletal muscle mass, they might need more creatine. So they're going to take 7 grams of creatine instead of 5. Close enough as well. All of these numbers are well within the safety and efficacy parameters displayed in the decades of research on creatine. So again, we'll repeat roughly 5 grams. Feel free to adjust slightly based on your personal needs or preferences. Finally, are there any safety concerns surrounding creatine and people who shouldn't take creatine? The short answer here is yes, but it's a small percentage of people. And that's primarily those individuals with kidney dysfunction that is significant enough or medications that impair kidney function. While there's always going to be somebody else out there who shouldn't take creatine. This is our biggest red flag that we're aware of. Two other groups that we'll identify here as well is those under 18 and also during pregnancy. Unlike our concerns with kidney health, our reasons for not recommending creatine for those under 18 and during pregnancy is more out of an abundance of caution, just due to the fact that we don't have the same depth of research on these individuals as we do others. And so we can't really take that same super high level of safety that creatine is famous for and apply it to groups that we haven't done as much research on. So hopefully more research will shed light on this, and especially for something like pregnancy where there's a high energy demand on the body, we would be excited to know that we can safely supplement. But for now, please use caution. And for all users of creatine, we do recommend speaking to your physician before supplementing. If nothing else, getting lab work done, creatine can impact that, and so it's good for your physician and or lab to know this so that they can adjust and interpret your lab results correctly. We mentioned we would get into creatine and brain health, so let's jump into that. Before we talk about the details of how creatine works in the brain, because this is another common point of confusion, let's revisit our earlier analogy and talk more about how creatine works in muscles. So our analogy about players on the field and the number of players doesn't change. We have the same amount of ATP, but we have greater ability to refresh those players and keep our ATP levels optimal. In muscle health, this sometimes causes confusion because people think, oh, if you take creatine, your muscles get bigger. And that's really missing a huge gap in how creatine's working. Creatine supports intense energy output and extended energy output. Your muscles get bigger when you use that energy to push farther and work out more or work out harder. That's what grows your muscles. Let's carry this with us as we move to brain health. When people look at creatine's role in brain health, similar to the idea of, will I feel like I'm on caffeine if I take creatine, they think, will I be smarter if I take creatine? Will I be able to think faster? And the answer is generally no here, with a little bit of a caveat. Remember, the number of players on the field doesn't change. We have the same level of energy. We're not supercharging our brain. However, when our brain is fatigued, when mental energy is being taxed or is running low, this is where having that deep reserve of backup players who can step in when those half-tired players are already getting fatigued, this is the magic of creatine for brain health. So while you're not going to take your base intelligence or your normal cognitive function and supercharge it, you are going to take those moments where you're not at your best and get closer to optimal energy via creatine. We really think there's a lot of value potentially to be had here, and that's especially going to shine in those individuals over 50, those with chronic stress and sleep deprivation, as well as related conditions. We look forward to seeing more research to definitively prove these things, but for now, we consider this extremely promising and likely for these individuals to notice some benefit. We are so grateful that you chose to join us for our video here on creatine. We remind you that healthwaynutritioncenter.com is a fantastic source for all your supplement needs. When you do business with us, you're supporting a small family business. There's no corporations here or board of investors, just straightforward business from a small family based out of Oregon. We'll look forward to catching you on the next video. Until then, stay healthy.